In today's documentary, we will discuss what Earth looked like before dinosaurs ever existed. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Planet on Fire, the Hadean Eon. 4.5 billion years ago, there was no Earth. There was a young star, our Sun, surrounded by a rotating disk of gas and dust and rock. And in that disk, particles were colliding, not gently, violently, at speeds measured in kilometers per second. This process is called accretion. Small particles of rock and metal stick together after collisions. Those small clusters attract more particles. The clusters grow. As they grow, their gravity increases. As their gravity increases, they attract more material even faster. And over hundreds of thousands of years, a runaway process begins. Small rocks become boulders. Boulders become planetesimals, bodies tens to hundreds of kilometers across. Planetesimals collide with each other, growing into protoplanets. And from those protoplanets, 4 rocky worlds eventually form in the inner solar system. One of them is Earth. But the Earth that forms is nothing like the Earth today. Understand this clearly. The early Earth is not a planet with continents and oceans and a blue sky. It is a ball of mostly molten rock. The surface temperature is estimated to be between 1,200 and 2,000 degrees Celsius. There is no solid ground anywhere. There is no ocean. There's no breathable atmosphere. The sky, if you can call it that, is filled with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. There is no free oxygen. If you were somehow transported to the surface of Hadean Earth, you would not survive for a single second. You would be incinerated before you could blink. This period of Earth's history is called the Hadean Eon, named after Hades, the ancient Greek underworld. And for once, a geological name is completely accurate. The Hadean runs from 4.5 to 4 billion years ago. It is 500 million years of hell. But what exactly is happening during those 500 million years? 3 things, primarily. First, the planet is still being bombarded by asteroids and other debris left over from the formation of the solar system. Not occasionally, constantly. The early solar system is crowded and chaotic, and the inner planets are absorbing impacts at a rate that is essentially incomprehensible by modern standards. Each major impact releases enormous amounts of energy, melting the surface, throwing material into orbit, and preventing any permanent crust from forming. Second, the interior of the Earth is churning. Radioactive elements, uranium-238, uranium-235, thorium-232, and potassium-40, are decaying inside the planet, releasing heat. Combined with the heat left over from accretion itself, the interior is extraordinarily hot. This heat drives convection. Hot material rises, cool material sinks, and this churning keeps the surface molten and geologically hyperactive. Volcanic activity is happening everywhere, not on 1 or 2 volcanoes, everywhere. The entire surface is being recycled continuously. Third, and this is the event that will shape the Earth permanently, something massive hits the planet. Approximately 4.5 billion years ago, within the first 100 million years of Earth's existence, a body roughly the size of Mars collides with proto-Earth. Scientists call this impactor Theia. The collision is not a glancing blow. It is a near-direct impact at an angle that drives Theia partially into Earth while sending enormous amounts of material, vaporized rock, molten debris, shattered fragments, into orbit around the planet. This material, this ring of molten debris around the young Earth, eventually coalesces under its own gravity. And within perhaps just a few thousand years, an eye blink in geological time, it forms a new body. The Moon, the giant impact. Hypothesis, as it is called, is today the leading scientific explanation for the Moon's origin. And it explains several things that otherwise make no sense. It explains why the Moon is so large relative to Earth. No other rocky planet in the solar system has a moon so disproportionately large. It explains why the Moon has very little iron in its core, because it formed primarily from the outer silicate layers of both Earth and Theia, after the iron cores had already sunk to the center of both bodies. It explains the similar oxygen isotope ratios between Earth and the Moon, because they formed from the same material. And it explains the Moon's lack of volatile compounds like water, because the violent heat of the impact drove those off. The impact also has one other crucial consequence. It tilts Earth's axis. Earth now rotates at approximately 23.4 degrees from vertical. That tilt is why Earth has seasons. Without Theia's impact, there may have been no seasons. Without seasons, the distribution of heat and cold across the planet would be fundamentally different. Life, if it ever emerged, would face a completely different set of challenges. One collision 4.5 billion years ago changed the entire future of this planet. Now, after the giant impact, the Moon is forming and Earth is in perhaps its most violent state yet. The surface is a global magma ocean, a planet-wide sea of molten rock. The Moon, being closer to Earth than it is today, raises tides in that magma ocean. Tides of liquid rock hundreds of meters high. The Moon is spiraling slowly outward from Earth, as it still does today, but at this point it is dramatically closer. Its gravitational pull is stronger. The tidal forces it exerts on the molten Earth are immense. Over hundreds of millions of years, Earth begins to cool. Not quickly, not uniformly, but gradually a thin crust begins to form on the surface, like a skin on cooling lava. This crust is broken and remelted repeatedly by ongoing impacts and internal heat. But over time, it becomes more persistent. And then comes the late heavy bombardment. Between approximately 4.1 and 3.8 billion years ago, the inner solar system experiences a dramatic spike in asteroid impacts. This period is called the late heavy bombardment, and its cause is still debated. The leading explanation involves the migration of the outer gas giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, into different orbital positions, which destabilize the asteroid belt and the outer solar system, sending massive numbers of asteroids on collision courses with the inner planets. The evidence for the late heavy bombardment comes from the Moon. The Moon preserves its ancient surface in a way that Earth does not, because the Moon has no plate tectonics, no erosion, no weather, and minimal geological activity. When you look at the Moon, the large circular basins, the dark areas, are impact craters formed during this period. Mare Imbrium, Mare Serenitatis, Mare Crisium. These are all impact scars from the late heavy bombardment. And if the Moon received that many impacts in that period, Earth, being larger and having stronger gravity, received far more. What does this mean for life? On one hand, the late heavy bombardment seems like it would have prevented life from forming. And for the most part, it probably did. Any organic molecules, any protocellular structures that might have been assembling, they would have been repeatedly destroyed by the heat and energy of major impacts. Some impacts were large enough to vaporize the entire ocean, if any ocean existed at the time. A body large enough, perhaps around 500 kilometers across, hitting Earth's ocean would convert all the water to steam and drive the surface temperature high enough to sterilize everything. But here is the paradox. The late heavy bombardment also delivered something crucial: water. The early Earth, forming close to the Sun, may have been too hot to retain much water during its initial formation. But asteroids, particularly a type called carbonaceous chondrites, contain significant amounts of water locked in their minerals. When these asteroids hit Earth during the late heavy bombardment, they delivered water that eventually became the oceans. Scientists have confirmed this by comparing the ratio of regular hydrogen to deuterium, a heavier form of hydrogen, in Earth's ocean water and in carbonaceous chondrites. They match. Your ocean came from space. Additionally, asteroids delivered organic molecules, amino acids, nucleobases, and other carbon-based compounds that are the building blocks of life. Amino acids have been found in meteorites. Nucleobases, the molecular letters that make up DNA and RNA, have been found in meteorites. The raw materials for life arrived from space. So the Hadean Eon is a period of almost unimaginable violence, constant bombardment, a molten surface, toxic atmosphere, no liquid water. And yet, by the end of it, things are changing. The bombardment is slowing. The planet is cooling. A crust is forming. Water is accumulating. Oceans are beginning to form. The earliest geological evidence, zircon crystals found in Australia's Jack Hills Formation, dates to 4.4 billion years ago. Those crystals formed in the presence of liquid water. Even during the Hadean, in the brief intervals between major impacts, water existed on the surface. The Hadean Eon ends at 4 billion years ago. The planet looks nothing like it does today, but it has cooled enough to have a semi-stable crust. It has liquid water on its surface, at least in places. It has an atmosphere, still poisonous by any standard you would reckon, still no free oxygen, but an atmosphere nonetheless. And then somewhere in some pool or ocean or hydrothermal vent or ice sheet or tidal flat, something begins. Something that has never happened before, as far as we know, anywhere in the universe. Chemistry crosses a threshold, and life begins. Chapter 2, The First Breath of Life, the Archean Eon. The Archean Eon runs from 4 billion to 2.5 billion years ago. That is 1.5 billion years. an amount of time so enormous that it contains roughly a third of all of Earth's history. And for nearly all of it, the only life on Earth consists of single-celled organisms with no nucleus, prokaryotes, invisible to the naked eye, living in the ocean, doing chemistry. But before we talk about life, we need to understand the world these first organisms are born into. And we need to understand how life itself begins, because this is one of the most important and most debated questions in all of science. By the beginning of the Archean, Earth has oceans. The sky is not blue. With no oxygen in the atmosphere, there is no ozone layer, and the sun's ultraviolet radiation is hitting the surface at full intensity. The sky is probably orange-pink, colored by methane haze. The ocean may be greenish, colored by dissolved iron compounds. The continents that exist at this point are small, low, and unstable. Nothing like the continents of today. They have not yet grown to their modern sizes. Volcanic activity is still extraordinarily high, far higher than today, because the interior of the planet is still hot from accretion and radioactive decay. The temperature of the early Archean ocean is debated, but estimates suggest it was significantly warmer than today's ocean, possibly between 40 and 80 degrees Celsius in many regions. The chemical composition of the ocean is also completely different from today. The ocean is rich in dissolved iron, silica, and other minerals. It has little to no dissolved oxygen. It is more acidic than today's ocean. It is, essentially, a planet-scale chemistry experiment. And in that chemistry experiment, something extraordinary happens. Life begins. We do not know exactly how. We do not know exactly where. We do not know exactly when within the Archean eon. Though the earliest fossil evidence for life dates to approximately 3.5 billion years ago, and some chemical evidence suggests life may have appeared as early as 4.1 billion years ago in the late Hadean. But we know it happened, because here we are. The leading hypotheses for the origin of life cluster around a few key ideas. The first is the RNA world hypothesis. Today's cells use DNA to store information and proteins to do chemistry. But DNA cannot replicate itself without proteins, and proteins cannot be made without DNA. This is a chicken and egg problem. How did this system start? RNA, ribonucleic acid, offers a solution. RNA is a molecule that can do both things. It can store information like DNA, and it can catalyze chemical reactions like proteins. In the RNA world hypothesis, the first living systems were based on self-replicating RNA molecules, not DNA. These RNA molecules could copy themselves, could catalyze their own chemistry, and over time could evolve by natural selection. DNA and proteins came later as more efficient systems for information storage and chemical work. The problem is that RNA is a complex molecule, and it is not obvious how it forms spontaneously. But laboratory experiments have shown that the building blocks of RNA, nucleotides, can form under conditions that plausibly existed on early Earth. And that once formed, RNA molecules can spontaneously assemble into structures that show basic self-replication. The chemistry is difficult, but it is not impossible. The second major hypothesis is about where life started. For decades, the popular image was Darwin's warm little pond, some shallow coastal pool warmed by sunlight, rich in organic chemicals, where RNA-like molecules first assembled. This is still a viable hypothesis, but a competing idea has gained enormous traction in recent decades, and that is the deep-sea hydrothermal vent hypothesis. At the bottom of today's oceans, along mid-ocean ridges and volcanic zones, there are hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor where superheated water, rich in minerals, jets upward into the cold ocean water. These vents create remarkable chemical environments. There are sharp gradients in temperature, pH, and chemical composition right at the vent opening. These gradients represent energy, the same kind of electrochemical energy that living cells use to power their chemistry today. A specific type of vent, called alkaline hydrothermal vents, like the Lost City hydrothermal field discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 2000, is particularly interesting to origin of life researchers. These vents produce hydrogen-rich alkaline fluids that mix with the acidic, carbon dioxide-rich ancient ocean. This creates proton gradients across thin mineral walls inside the vent structures. And proton gradients across membranes are exactly the mechanism that all living cells use today to generate energy. A process called chemiosmosis. The alkaline vent hypothesis argues that life did not need to invent this energy system. It evolved inside a geological system that was already running it. What is certain is that by 3.5 billion years ago, life exists on Earth. We have fossil evidence, stromatolites. Stromatolites are layered rock structures formed by communities of microorganisms, primarily cyanobacteria and other bacteria, that trap and bind sediment, gradually building up layered domes or columns over time. Fossil stromatolites from the Pilbara region of Western Australia date to 3.48 billion years ago. Chemical evidence, carbon isotope signatures characteristic of biological processes, suggests life may date back even further to 3.7 billion years ago in Greenland, or even 4.1 billion years ago in ancient zircon crystals. These first organisms are prokaryotes, cells with no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, no internal structure beyond the cell membrane and the chemical machinery floating inside it. They are the simplest possible form of life, but they are already doing something remarkable. They are metabolizing, taking in chemicals from their environment, running chemical reactions, extracting energy, building new molecules, and replicating. The first organisms are anaerobic. They do not use oxygen because there is essentially no oxygen to use. They live on the chemical energy available in their environment: hydrogen, methane, sulfur compounds, iron compounds. These are called chemoautotrophs, organisms that make their own food from chemicals rather than sunlight. Life's first diet is rock and seawater chemistry. The early Archean ocean is full of dissolved iron, specifically ferrous iron, the reduced form. Iron is abundant because it is being continuously delivered from volcanic activity and from the weathering of ancient rock. And this dissolved iron will become crucial later when oxygen starts to appear. But for now, the ocean is essentially a global iron-rich soup. and the early organisms are making use of the chemistry that provides. Over hundreds of millions of years, the microbial communities in the early ocean diversify. Natural selection is working. Even at this simplest level, organisms that replicate more efficiently, that metabolize more effectively, that survive environmental challenges better, leave more descendants. Genetic diversity accumulates. Different metabolic strategies evolve. The microbial world is not static. It is evolving, adapting, branching. And then, approximately 3 billion years ago, or possibly earlier, one of the most important evolutionary innovations in the history of life appears. A group of bacteria called cyanobacteria evolved the ability to do something fundamentally new. They learn to use sunlight and water and carbon dioxide to make food. They invent oxygenic photosynthesis. This is the same process that plants use today. The chemical equation is straightforward. Carbon dioxide plus water, powered by sunlight, produces glucose and oxygen. 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules, driven by photons of light, produce 1 molecule of glucose, a sugar, and 6 molecules of oxygen gas. The oxygen is released as a waste product. For the cyanobacteria, this is a triumph. They now have access to energy directly from sunlight. Unlimited energy, available everywhere there is light and water. They spread across the Archean Ocean. They form stromatolites in shallow seas. They bloom, they thrive. But that waste product, that oxygen, is doing something to the planet. And it is not doing it slowly. Oxygen is accumulating, not yet in the atmosphere, not yet. For now, the oxygen released by cyanobacteria is immediately reacting with dissolved iron in the ocean. Ferrous iron reacts with oxygen to form ferric iron, rust, which is insoluble and sinks to the sea floor. The ocean is rust-proofing. Layer after layer of iron oxide is accumulating on the seafloor, forming the geological formations we call banded iron formations, alternating layers of iron-rich and silica-rich rock that geologists can read today, like tree rings, as a record of the oxygenation of the ancient ocean. The oxygen is being captured by the iron, but the iron supply is not infinite. And as the oxygen keeps coming, as the cyanobacteria keep photosynthesizing, a point is reached, approximately 2.4 billion years ago, when the dissolved iron in the ocean runs out. There is no more iron to soak up the oxygen, and the oxygen starts to leak into the atmosphere. What happens next is catastrophic, and it kills almost everything alive. The bombardment slows, the surface begins to cool. And then something happens that scientists still argue about today. The first signs that this hellscape might be doing something no one expected. Something is forming in the ancient ocean. Something alive. Chapter 3. The Great Poisoning, the Great Oxidation Event, 2.4 billion years ago. Let us be very specific about what the atmosphere of Earth looks like at this moment. It is approximately 70% nitrogen, roughly similar to today. It has significant amounts of carbon dioxide and methane. It has essentially zero free oxygen molecules floating in the air. The oxygen content of the Archean atmosphere is estimated at less than 1/100,000th of today's level. The atmosphere is, by modern standards, a toxic, suffocating hell. But for the life that exists at this moment, it is home. The anaerobic organisms, the bacteria and archaea that have been thriving for over 1 billion years, do not need oxygen. Many of them are not just indifferent to oxygen. They are actively poisoned by it. Oxygen is a highly reactive molecule. It attacks organic compounds. It destroys certain biological structures and chemical processes. For organisms evolved to live without it, oxygen is as toxic as cyanide. And now the cyanobacteria are pumping it into the atmosphere. This is called the Great Oxidation Event, or sometimes the Great Oxygenation Event. It occurs between approximately 2.4 and 2.1 billion years ago. And it is the first mass extinction in the history of Earth. Let us understand the scale of this event. For over 1 billion years, perhaps closer to 2 billion years, the dominant life forms on Earth are anaerobic organisms. They fill the ocean. They cover the shallow seafloor in vast microbial mats. They have diversified into thousands of metabolic strategies. They have had billions of generations to evolve and specialize. They're extraordinarily successful. And then their atmosphere becomes poisonous. Not over millions of years, slowly enough to adapt. Over a geological period that, while long by human standards, is rapid by evolutionary standards. The transition from nearly zero oxygen to oxygen levels approaching perhaps 1 to 2% of today's values happens in a geologically short window. Most anaerobic life cannot adapt fast enough. It retreats, it goes extinct, or it finds refuge in places where oxygen cannot reach, deep sediments, inside rocks, at the bottom of the ocean, in the guts of other organisms. Those refugia, those oxygen-free hiding places, are exactly where you find obligate anaerobic bacteria today, 2.4 billion years later. They are the survivors, the last living representatives of Earth's original inhabitants, driven underground, literally, by the oxygen revolution. The Great Oxidation Event also does something to the atmosphere that dramatically changes the climate. It destroys the methane. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. The Archean atmosphere had significant methane, which was keeping Earth warm, despite the fact that the early sun was approximately 20 to 25% less bright than it is today. Without the methane greenhouse effect, the early Earth would have been frozen solid. This is sometimes called the faint young sun paradox. How did Earth stay warm enough for liquid water and life when the sun was significantly dimmer? The answer is the greenhouse effect of methane and carbon dioxide. But when oxygen enters the atmosphere, it reacts with methane. 2 molecules of methane and 3 molecules of oxygen react to produce 2 molecules of carbon dioxide and 2 molecules of water. The methane is destroyed. The greenhouse effect weakens dramatically, and Earth's temperature plunges. The result is the Huronian glaciation, a series of ice ages that may have been the most severe glaciation events in Earth's history, beginning approximately 2.4 billion years ago and lasting perhaps 300 million years. During the Huronian, ice sheets extend to very low latitudes. Some scientists believe Earth came close to complete global glaciation, a snowball Earth event, during this period, but not quite. Volcanic activity continued to pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, eventually warming the planet out of its deep freeze. So the Great Oxidation Event kills most of the life that exists at the time, transforms the chemistry of both the atmosphere and ocean, and plunges the planet into a series of severe ice ages. By any measure, it is one of the most catastrophic single events in Earth's history. And yet, from the perspective of the long arc of life on Earth, it is also the most important single event, because it makes everything that follows possible. Oxygen fundamentally changes what living things can do. Anaerobic metabolism, the kind of metabolism that does not use oxygen, is relatively inefficient. It produces a limited amount of energy from a given amount of food. But aerobic respiration, metabolism that uses oxygen, is dramatically more efficient. The complete breakdown of one glucose molecule using anaerobic fermentation produces only 2 molecules of ATP, the cellular energy currency. The complete breakdown of one glucose molecule using aerobic respiration produces approximately 30 to 32 molecules of ATP, 15 to 16 times more energy from the same food. Oxygen also allows for the production of certain molecules, particularly sterols like cholesterol, that are essential for the more complex cell membranes that complex life requires. Oxygen enables a richer, more energetic, more diverse form of biochemistry, and in doing so, it enables more complex life to exist. The survivors of the Great Oxidation Event, including the cyanobacteria themselves and the aerobic bacteria that evolved to use oxygen, are now operating in a world with a new, more energetic atmosphere. And among those survivors, something extraordinary is beginning to happen. Something so unlikely, so improbable, that it appears to have happened exactly once in the history of life on Earth. A bacterial cell encounters another bacterial cell, and instead of one eating the other, they merge. The survivors of the Great Poisoning are scattered and barely alive. But evolution does not stop, and deep inside some of these surviving cells, something is about to happen that will make all complex life, including you, possible. Chapter 4. The Invention of the Cell, Endosymbiosis and the Eukaryotic Revolution, 2.1 billion years ago. The Great Oxidation Event is winding down. The atmosphere now has detectable levels of oxygen, still far below today's 21%, but enough to be significant. Life has been reshuffled. The anaerobes have retreated, the aerobes have expanded, and the planet is slowly warming out of the Huronian glaciation. And somewhere, in some ancient ocean, an event occurs that changes everything. A large prokaryotic cell, a cell without a nucleus, engulfs a smaller prokaryotic cell. This was not unusual. Cells engulf other cells all the time. It is called phagocytosis. Usually, the engulfed cell is digested. But this time, the engulfed cell is not digested. it survives inside the larger cell. And instead of being destroyed, it forms a partnership. This is endosymbiosis. The swallowed cell is an aerobic bacterium, a cell already adapted to use oxygen. Inside the larger host cell, it continues doing what it does, using oxygen to generate energy. But now it is generating energy for two. It is generating energy for itself, and it is generating energy that the host cell can use. In exchange, the host cell provides the bacterium with a stable, protected environment, protection from the outside world, a constant supply of nutrients, and a safe place to reproduce. Over millions of generations, something remarkable happens. The endosymbiont, the bacterium living inside the host, begins to lose genes. Genes it no longer needs, because the host cell is now providing functions that the endosymbiont previously had to provide for itself, are gradually lost. Other genes are transferred from the endosymbiont to the host cell's genome. The two organisms become inseparable. One cannot survive without the other. They have become, in every meaningful sense, a single organism. The endosymbiont becomes the mitochondrion, the organelle that generates energy in every eukaryotic cell on Earth. In your cells, right now. The mitochondria in your cells are the direct descendants, reduced, modified, but still living, of free-living bacteria that were swallowed by another cell approximately 2 billion years ago. They still have their own DNA, separate from your cell's DNA. They still replicate independently inside your cells. They still have membranes descended from bacterial membranes. They are bacteria, living inside you. This event, this merger of two prokaryotic cells, is the origin of the eukaryotic cell. A cell with a nucleus, with membrane-bound organelles, with mitochondria. This is the cell type that makes up every complex organism on Earth. Every plant, every animal, every fungus, every single-celled organism with a nucleus, all eukaryotes, all descended from that one merger event. And it happened once. As far as we can determine from the evidence, the eukaryotic cell arose exactly once. Every eukaryote alive today shares a single common ancestor, a single cell that resulted from that first endosymbiotic merger. All complex life on Earth traces back to a single event, but the story does not end with mitochondria. Later, in the lineage that leads to plants, a similar merger happens with a photosynthetic cyanobacterium. A eukaryotic cell engulfs a cyanobacterium. The cyanobacterium becomes the chloroplast, the organelle that captures sunlight in plant cells. All the oxygen produced by plant photosynthesis today is produced by organelles that are, in essence, cyanobacteria living inside plant cells, captured in a second great endosymbiotic event. The eukaryotic cell is fundamentally different from a prokaryotic cell in ways that matter enormously for the future of life. First, it is larger, typically 10 to 100 times the volume of a prokaryote. Second, it has a nucleus, a membrane-enclosed compartment that contains and protects the DNA, separating transcription of DNA into RNA from the translation of RNA into proteins. This separation allows more complex regulation of gene expression. Third, it has mitochondria, giving it dramatically more energy per unit of cellular volume. That 15-fold increase in energy efficiency we discussed. And fourth, crucially, it can evolve new structures and new functions far more easily because it has more DNA, more regulatory complexity, and more internal organization. The eukaryotic cell is a platform for complexity, and once it exists, evolution starts using it. Approximately 1.5 billion years ago, during the Proterozoic eon, the first definitive eukaryotic fossils appear. These are cells that are unmistakably larger and more complex than prokaryotes. Some have preserved internal structures. Some show evidence of a nucleus. And then, approximately 1.2 billion years ago, another extraordinary innovation appears. Sex, sexual reproduction, the combination of genetic material from two different individuals to produce offspring with a mixture of both parents' genes, appears in the eukaryotic lineage approximately 1.2 billion years ago. The earliest evidence comes from a fossil called Bangiomorpha pubescens, a red alga from rocks in northern Canada. It shows structures that are consistent with sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is, from a genetic standpoint, extravagant and costly. An organism that reproduces sexually only passes on half its genes to each offspring, compared to an organism that reproduces asexually, which passes on all its genes. So why does sexual reproduction exist? Why doesn't asexual reproduction always win? The answer is genetic diversity. Every time sexual reproduction occurs, new combinations of genes are created. This diversity means that in a population of sexually reproducing organisms, there will always be some individuals with beneficial combinations of traits that no individual had before. When environments change, when diseases appear, when temperatures shift, when food sources disappear, there will be some individuals in the population already carrying the combinations of traits that allow survival. Sexual reproduction is an engine of adaptability. It accelerates evolution by orders of magnitude. Asexual reproduction produces genetic diversity only through mutation, a slow, random process. Sexual reproduction reshuffles the entire genome with every generation. It is evolution on fast forward. And with sexual reproduction comes another possibility that was previously unavailable: multicellularity. Approximately 1 billion years ago, the first genuinely multicellular organisms begin to appear. Individual cells begin to stick together and differentiate, to specialize. Instead of every cell in a body doing everything, cells begin to divide labor. Some cells photosynthesize. Some cells provide structural support. Some cells reproduce. The body as a whole can do things that no single cell can do alone. The earliest multicellular fossils are simple: sheets of cells, filaments, spherical clusters. But they represent the beginning of something extraordinary. Because once cells can stick together and specialize, there is no theoretical limit to the complexity of the bodies that natural selection can build. Given enough time, enough evolutionary pressure, and enough variation, multicellular organisms can become extraordinarily complex. We are now approximately 1 billion years ago. Life has been on Earth for at least 3 billion years. The eukaryotic cell has evolved, sexual reproduction has been invented, multicellular life is beginning to appear, things seem to be accelerating. And then the planet betrays everything. Again. A catastrophe so total, so absolute, that Earth will be buried under ice from pole to equator. Life will have nowhere to go. And yet somehow, impossibly, it survives. Chapter 5. Snowball Earth. The Cryogenian Period. 720 million years ago. Earth is experiencing something that sounds physically impossible. Something that, when the first evidence was found, was rejected as absurd. Something that required decades of accumulated evidence before the scientific community accepted it was real. The entire planet is freezing. Not partially, not just the poles, entirely. The equator is freezing, the tropics are freezing, the oceans are freezing from surface to bottom at high latitudes and to depths of hundreds to perhaps thousands of meters even at the equator. Earth's surface is covered, pole to equator, in ice. The planet reflects so much sunlight back into space that temperatures at the equator may be comparable to modern Antarctica, around -40 to -50 degrees Celsius. This is Snowball Earth, and it happens not once, but at least twice during the Cryogenian period, between 720 million and 635 million years ago. Possibly 3 times. The main glaciation events are called the Sturtian glaciation and the Marinoan glaciation. Each lasts tens of millions of years. How does this happen? How does a planet freeze from pole to equator? The answer requires understanding a feedback loop called the ice albedo feedback. Albedo is the reflectivity of a surface, how much incoming sunlight it reflects back into space rather than absorbing. Ice and snow have very high albedo. They reflect approximately 80 to 90% of incoming sunlight. Open ocean water has very low albedo. It absorbs approximately 90% of incoming sunlight. Bare rock and land have intermediate albedo. If, for any reason, ice begins to grow, if glaciers expand, if sea ice spreads, the reflectivity of Earth's surface increases. More sunlight is reflected, less heat is absorbed, the planet cools, and when the planet cools, more ice forms, which reflects more sunlight, which cools the planet more, which forms more ice. This is a positive feedback loop, a runaway process. Once it starts, it has no natural stopping point. It will continue until the ice covers everything. What triggers the initial cooling that starts this feedback loop in the Cryogenian? The leading hypotheses include several factors. First, the breakup of the supercontinent Rodinia, which predated Pangaea, repositioned the continents such that more landmass sat in the tropics. Tropical rock weathers rapidly, and rock weathering pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, a process called silicate weathering. More tropical rock means more weathering, means lower carbon dioxide, means less greenhouse warming. The planet cools. Ice begins to form. The feedback kicks in. Second, volcanic activity may have been reduced during this period, decreasing the output of volcanic carbon dioxide. Less carbon dioxide, less greenhouse effect, cooler planet, more ice. Third, The rise of the first complex multicellular organisms may itself have played a role. Increased biological productivity in the ocean can draw down carbon dioxide. More life, less carbon dioxide, cooler planet. Whatever the trigger, the feedback loop runs to completion. Earth freezes entirely. The oceans are covered in ice. The land is buried under glaciers. The snow is white, the sky is clear, and the sun's energy bounces uselessly back into space. The question that troubled geologists for decades, the question that made many dismiss the snowball Earth hypothesis as physically impossible, is this: how do you escape? Once you have a fully frozen planet covered in highly reflective ice, how does it ever warm up again? The ice reflects sunlight. The planet stays cold, the ice stays. There seems to be no escape. The answer is volcanoes. Even under a frozen Earth, the planet's interior continues to operate. Plate tectonics does not stop. Volcanoes do not stop. Carbon dioxide continues to be emitted by volcanic activity, somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2 cubic kilometers of volcanic rock per year, continuously releasing carbon dioxide. And in a frozen world, that carbon dioxide has nowhere to go. Normally, volcanic carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere by silicate weathering. Rain reacts with carbon dioxide to form carbonic acid, which then reacts with silicate rock to form carbonate minerals. This process scrubs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But on a snowball Earth, the land is buried under ice and snow. Liquid water does not contact silicate rock. Weathering essentially stops. Volcanic carbon dioxide accumulates in the atmosphere with nothing to remove it. Over tens of millions of years, carbon dioxide levels build up to extraordinary concentrations. Estimates suggest they may have reached 300 to 350 times today's levels, perhaps 12% of the atmosphere. At those concentrations, the greenhouse effect is so powerful that even the highly reflective ice surface cannot compensate. The planet begins to warm. Ice begins to melt at the margins. As ice melts, dark ocean water is exposed. Dark ocean water absorbs sunlight. The planet warms faster. More ice melts. More dark water. The feedback runs in reverse. Now a runaway warming. The deglaciation of snowball Earth is not gentle. It is violent and rapid in geological terms. With 300 times modern carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, temperatures spike dramatically once the ice begins to retreat. The tropics may have briefly reached temperatures of 50 or 60 degrees Celsius. The ice melts rapidly. Enormous amounts of fresh meltwater flood into the ocean. Chemical gradients across the ocean are disrupted. The chemistry of the ocean swings wildly, from the acidic carbon dioxide-rich water under the ice to something very different as the ice retreats. The evidence for snowball Earth is found in the rock record. Glacial deposits, rocks carried and dropped by glaciers called diamictites, have been found on every continent, at latitudes that would have been tropical during the Cryogenian period. The tropics were glaciated. On top of these glacial deposits in the rock record sits a layer of carbonate rock, calcium carbonate, called a cap carbonate. These cap carbonates form rapidly globally as the intense carbon dioxide-enriched ocean precipitates calcium carbonate during the deglaciation. They are the geological fingerprint of a global deglaciation event following extreme glaciation. They are found everywhere, on every continent, right on top of the glacial deposits. But here is the question that should be haunting you right now. What happened to life? If the ocean freezes, even partially, and the continents are buried in ice, where does life survive for tens of millions of years? And not just survive, because the evidence tells us that the multicellular eukaryotes that existed before Snowball Earth are still present after it. They survive. How? The ocean does not freeze completely through even on a Snowball Earth. The ice is thickest at the poles, perhaps hundreds of meters thick. At the equator, tidal forces and geothermal heating keep the ice somewhat thinner. And in volcanic regions, at hydrothermal vents and near volcanic islands, the ice may be thin enough for liquid water to exist beneath it. These ice-covered refugia, liquid water zones beneath the ice, may have harbored the survivors of Snowball Earth. Think of them as the world's most extreme versions of Antarctica's subglacial lakes. Lake Vostok, for example, buried under 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, but still liquid, still harboring microbial life today. On a Snowball Earth, similar environments existed globally. Liquid water pockets, volcanic heat sources, chemically rich hydrothermal environments, where life hung on for millions of years. The evidence for this comes from the fact that complex multicellular life, multicellular algae in particular, is found in the fossil record both before and after the Snowball Earth events. These organisms were present before the glaciation. They are present after. They survived, in refugia, for tens of millions of years. And when the ice melts, when the world floods back to warmth and liquid ocean, what happens? The ice breaks. The world floods with warmth and carbon dioxide. The ocean, starved of nutrients for millions of years, suddenly receives a massive influx of minerals from glacial meltwater. Nutrients that were locked away are now freely available. And what comes next is so explosive, so sudden in geological terms, that scientists spent over a century arguing about whether it was even real. Chapter 6. The explosion of animal life. The Ediacaran and Cambrian periods 635 million years ago. Snowball Earth is over. The planet has just thawed from one of the most extreme climate events in its history. The ocean is bathed in carbon dioxide. Nutrients are flooding in from glacial meltwater, and life, the survivors of the deep freeze, is beginning to expand into a world that is, for the first time in tens of millions of years, warm and open. The period from 635 to 538 million years ago is called the Ediacaran period, named after the Ediacara Hills in South Australia, where fossils from this period were first found in significant numbers in the 1940s. And the Ediacaran biota, the organisms that lived during this period, are among the strangest things that have ever existed on Earth. Before the Ediacaran, multicellular life had been limited to relatively simple forms, sheets and filaments of cells, small colonial organisms. In the Ediacaran, something new appears. Larger, more structurally complex organisms. organisms with clear body symmetry, organisms that look at first glance like they might be animals. But the Ediacaran fauna are deeply, profoundly, confusingly weird. Dickinsonia, one of the most famous Ediacaran fossils, is a flat, oval organism that looks somewhat like a ribbed mat, reaching up to 1.4 meters in length. It has no mouth, no gut, no identifiable sensory organs. It moved. There is evidence of it moving across the seafloor, leaving traces. But what it was, what phylum it belongs to, how it relates to modern animals, has been debated for decades. Some scientists classify it as an early animal. Others argue it belongs to a completely separate kingdom of life, one that went entirely extinct without leaving any living descendants. Carnia, a frond-like Ediacaran organism, looks like a fern or a feather attached to the seafloor. It is one of the first complex multicellular organisms found in rocks predating the Cambrian. Fractofusus looks like a fractal pattern, branching structures repeated at different scales. Tribrachidium has threefold symmetry, like a three-armed spiral. Nothing alive today has threefold body symmetry. The Ediacaran world is a world without predation, or very nearly so. There are no eyes, no claws, no shells, no teeth, no armor. The organisms of the Ediacaran live on or near the seafloor, absorbing organic matter, filtering water, possibly photosynthesizing through symbiotic relationships. Peaceful, slow, barely structured. It is a garden. Biologists sometimes call it the Garden of Ediacara, a world of organisms that had no predators and no defenses because there was nothing to defend against. And then, approximately 538 million years ago, the Cambrian period begins, and the garden ends. The Cambrian explosion is one of the most dramatic and still most debated events in the history of life. Over a geological period of perhaps 20 to 25 million years, which sounds long, but is extraordinarily short by evolutionary standards, essentially all of the major animal body plans that exist today appear in the fossil record. Arthropods, mollusks, echinoderms, chordates, the group that eventually produces vertebrates, fish, and eventually us, annelids, brachiopods. Nearly every major branch of the animal family tree appears, seemingly at once, in the early Cambrian. Why? What caused the Cambrian explosion? Several factors are likely involved. The rise of oxygen levels to a threshold that allows more energetic, more active lifestyles. The availability of calcium in the ocean, allowing organisms to build mineralized shells and skeletons for the first time. The development of predation, which drove an evolutionary arms race between predators and prey, generating selection pressure that rapidly drove the evolution of new body plans, new senses, new defensive structures. And possibly ecological cascades. Once a few key innovations appeared, they created new ecological niches, which drove the evolution of new organisms to fill them, which created new niches in a self-accelerating explosion of biodiversity. The invention of the eye deserves particular attention. The earliest eyes appear in the Cambrian. The ability to detect light, and specifically to detect the direction of a light source, and eventually to form images, is a transformative evolutionary innovation. A predator with eyes can hunt. A prey organism cannot hide simply by being still. It can be seen. The evolution of the eye essentially ended the peaceful Ediacaran world and started an arms race that has not stopped since. And eyes appear, according to some evolutionary analyses, in dozens of independent lineages during the Cambrian, convergent evolution of vision happening repeatedly across the animal kingdom. The Burgess Shale, discovered in the Canadian Rockies in 1909 by paleontologist Charles Walcott, provides the most remarkable window into the Cambrian world. An exceptional fossil site where soft tissue is preserved, not just hard shells and bones, but eyes, gut contents, gill structures, limbs, and body outlines. What it reveals is a world of organisms so bizarre that they beggar description. Anomalocaris, abnormal shrimp, is perhaps the most famous. It reaches about 1 meter in length and is the apex predator of the Cambrian Sea. It has a circular, toothed, rasping mouth structure unlike anything seen in modern animals. It has stalked, compound eyes with remarkable visual resolution. It has a pair of large, spiny frontal appendages for capturing prey. It swims using lateral lobes along its body. It is a fearsome predator in a world where most organisms are small and soft-bodied. Hallucigenia, named because it was so strange that the scientist who first described it thought he was looking at a hallucination, walks on a series of paired spines along its underside, with soft tentacles along its back. Or so it was thought. When the fossil was eventually correctly interpreted, it turned out that the creature had been reconstructed upside down and back to front. The spines are on the back, for defense. The tentacles are legs. It is a lobopodian, a distant relative of modern velvet worms. Opabinia has 5 eyes, 5 compound eyes on stalks arranged in a row across its head, and a long, flexible frontal appendage tipped with a claw used for feeding. Nothing alive today has 5 eyes. Nothing alive today has a structure quite like Opabinia's frontal appendage. When Opabinia was first described at a paleontology conference in 1972, the audience reportedly laughed. Not from disrespect, but from sheer astonishment. The creature was so improbable, so unimaginable, that it seemed like something from a fever dream. Wiwaxia was covered in scales and spines, looking something like a medieval mace crossed with a slug. Nectocaris, once thought to be a primitive chordate, has been reinterpreted as a possible early cephalopod, with 2 tentacles and a funnel for jet propulsion. Picaia, a small eel-like creature, is considered one of the earliest known chordates, making it a very distant ancestor of every vertebrate on Earth, including you. The Cambrian Sea is not a gentle place. Predators hunt. Prey defends itself with shells and spines and speed. Eyes see. Appendages grasp. Mouths eat. It is the most dramatic evolutionary arms race in the history of life, and it is running on fast forward. But the Cambrian Sea has one fundamental limitation. It is a sea. The land is still empty. The continents are bare rock. No plant has ever grown on land. No animal has ever walked on a continent. The terrestrial world, vast, sun-drenched, resource-rich, is completely available and completely unoccupied. The Cambrian seas are full of life, full of bizarre experiments in body design. But the land is still completely empty. Not a single animal has stepped onto dry ground. Not yet. But something is coming. And when it arrives, it will change what Earth looks like permanently. Chapter 7. Life Conquers the Land. The Ordovician and Silurian periods. 485 million years ago. The Ordovician period begins. The Cambrian explosion has produced an extraordinary diversity of marine life. The ocean is full of trilobites, arthropods with segmented bodies and compound eyes that will persist for over 250 million years. Graptolites, colonial organisms that floated in the open ocean, are so abundant their fossils are found on nearly every continent. Nautiloid cephalopods, distant ancestors of today's nautiluses and octopuses, some reaching several meters in length, are among the apex predators of the Ordovician Sea. Echinoderms, the group that includes today's sea stars, sea urchins and sea cucumbers, are spreading across the seafloor. The land is still bare, but not for much longer. The colonization of land is not something that happens with animals first. Animals cannot colonize land without food. Food on land means plants, and plants cannot colonize land without a crucial partner, fungi. The first land plants evolve from green algae, specifically a group called the charophytes. The molecular and fossil evidence indicates that land plants and their closest green algal relatives share a common ancestor that lived approximately 500 to 450 million years ago. The earliest unambiguous land plant fossils, spores with resistant outer coatings characteristic of land plants, date to approximately 470 million years ago in the Ordovician. But the plants themselves may have been around even earlier. The challenge of living on land is immense. In water, an organism is supported by the buoyancy of the surrounding fluid. On land, it must support its own weight against gravity. In water, an organism is surrounded by liquid. It does not dry out. On land, it is exposed to air, which desiccates. In water, nutrients can be absorbed directly from the surrounding fluid. On land, nutrients must be obtained from soil, and in the early Ordovician there is barely any soil. The land surface is mostly bare, weathered rock. How do the first land plants solve these problems? With help. Specifically with fungi. Fungi are extraordinary organisms. They are not plants. They do not photosynthesize. They grow networks of thin threads called hyphae through soil and organic matter, secreting enzymes that break down organic and mineral compounds and absorbing the resulting nutrients. Fungi are the primary decomposers in most terrestrial ecosystems. They break down dead organic matter, releasing nutrients for other organisms. And they form intimate partnerships with plant roots, called mycorrhizal associations, where the fungus provides the plant with water and mineral nutrients, especially phosphorus, from the soil, in exchange for sugars that the plant produces through photosynthesis. The oldest fossil mycorrhizal associations, fungi intertwined with early land plant tissue, date to approximately 460 million years ago. And it is likely that the colonization of land by plants was only possible because of this partnership. The early land surface was nutrient-poor, bare rock. Fungi were already capable of extracting minerals from rock and making them bioavailable. The plant-fungus partnership allowed plants to access nutrients in an environment where they otherwise could not survive. The first land plants are small, tiny, resembling modern liverworts and mosses. They have no vascular system, no internal tubes for transporting water and nutrients. They are limited in size because water must diffuse through their tissues. They cling to wet rock surfaces near water. They do not penetrate inland, but they change the land. They produce organic matter. When they die, fungi decompose them, beginning the long process of soil formation. Soil begins to accumulate. More plants can grow, more soil forms. The land is slowly, over millions of years, becoming habitable. Animals follow the plants. And the first animals to colonize land are not vertebrates. They are arthropods. The earliest land animal fossils from the Silurian period, approximately 420 million years ago, include millipede-like creatures, arachnids, and primitive insects. These arthropods are pre-adapted for land life in ways that vertebrates are not. Their exoskeletons provide structural support and resist desiccation. Their respiratory systems, book lungs or tracheae, can work in air. Their jointed legs allow them to walk on solid ground. Arthropods did not need to reinvent the wheel to move onto land. Their existing body plan worked. The millipede-like organism Pneumodesmus pneumani from Scotland, dated to approximately 428 million years ago, is the oldest known air-breathing land animal. It has breathing pores in its exoskeleton, spiracles, that allowed it to breathe air. It fed on decaying plant matter and fungi. It was followed by more arthropods, spiders, mites, early insects, all taking advantage of the growing terrestrial ecosystem. But while all of this is happening, while plants and arthropods are cautiously colonizing the land, the marine world experiences a catastrophe. Approximately 445 million years ago, at the end of the Ordovician period, Earth suffers the second largest mass extinction in its history. The end Ordovician extinction kills approximately 85% of all marine species. It happens in two pulses: a rapid pulse of extinction followed by a brief recovery, followed by a second pulse. The cause is a brief but severe glaciation. The supercontinent at the time, Gondwana, has drifted over the South Pole. Ice sheets form on Gondwana. Sea level drops as water is locked up in ice. Shallow seas, where most marine life lives, drain. Habitats disappear. Temperatures plunge. And then, as the glaciation ends and the climate warms, a second wave of extinctions hits, possibly from the rush of meltwater changing ocean circulation and chemistry. The trilobites are decimated, never fully recovering their earlier diversity. The graptolites are nearly wiped out. The early coral reefs that had begun to develop in the Ordovician are destroyed. 85% of all species gone. But life recovers. It always does. The Silurian period, from 444 to 419 million years ago, sees the recovery and rediversification of marine life. New coral reefs develop. New groups of organisms fill the ecological roles vacated by the extinctions. And on land, the diversification of plants and arthropods continues. In the Silurian, vascular plants appear. Plants with internal tubes, xylem for transporting water up from roots, phloem for transporting sugars from leaves to roots. These vascular systems allow plants to grow taller, much taller than non-vascular plants. The evolution of vascular tissue is the beginning of the age of forests. And in the Silurian, the first upright plant stems appear. Plants are beginning very slowly to reach for the sky. Life has taken the land. Plants are spreading. Animals are following. And now in the seas, a group of animals is evolving a feature so powerful, so transformative, that it will eventually produce every apex predator on land, sea and air, including the dinosaurs. And it starts with the jaw. Chapter 8. The Age of Fish. The Devonian Period. 419 million years ago. The Devonian period begins. It will last until 359 million years ago, 60 million years. In that 60 million years, the ocean will transform, the land will transform, and a group of aquatic animals will make a transition that will eventually produce every land vertebrate in Earth's history. But first, fish, because the Devonian is sometimes called the Age of Fish. And to understand why, we need to go back a little further, back to the Ordovician and Silurian, when vertebrates first appear. The first vertebrates, animals with a backbone, are fish. Specifically, jawless fish, agnathons. The earliest fossil evidence for vertebrates dates to approximately 520 million years ago in the Cambrian. Creatures like Milocunmingia, a small, soft-bodied fish-like organism without jaws, with a notochord, a precursor to the backbone, and small fins. By the Ordovician and Silurian, agnathon fish are diversifying significantly. Many are covered in bony armour, ostracoderms. They filter feed or scavenge from the sea floor. They have no jaws. Without jaws, they cannot actively bite prey. They are limited in the ecological roles they can fill. And then jaws evolve. Jaws evolve from gill arches. Fish breathe through gills, structures in the throat that extract oxygen from water passing through. Gills are supported by bony or cartilaginous arches. Approximately 450 to 440 million years ago, the front pair of gill arches, which supported the opening of the throat, is modified. It rotates forward. The upper element becomes the upper jaw. The lower element becomes the lower jaw. The gill arch has become a mouth that can open and close with force. The evolution of the jaw is a transformation of comparable importance to the evolution of the eye. With jaws, fish can bite. They can capture prey actively. They can process food that was previously inaccessible. The jaw opens ecological niches that were closed to jawless fish. And jawed fish, the gnathostoms, rapidly diversify and come to dominate the world's oceans. In the Devonian, the dominant jawed fish are the placoderms. Armoured fish, with bony plates covering the head and front portion of the body, articulated so that the head can tilt upward while the lower jaw drops, giving them an enormous gape. Placoderms diversify enormously in the Devonian. They fill every ecological role: filter feeders, reef dwellers, open water predators, bottom feeders. And one placoderm becomes the apex predator of the Devonian Ocean, Dunkleosteus terrelli. A placoderm reaching estimates of 6 to 8 meters in length and possibly weighing 2 to 3,000 kilograms. It has no teeth. Its jaws are made of self-sharpening bony blades that function like shears. Bite force estimates, based on biomechanical modelling of the jaw muscles and lever arms, range from 5,000 to 11,000 newtons, some of the highest bite forces of any fish ever. For comparison, a great white shark has a bite force of approximately 18,000 newtons, but modern sharks are significantly larger. Pound for pound, Dunkleosteus's bite is extraordinary. Dunkleosteus could open and close its jaws in 50 to 60 milliseconds, fast enough to create a suction force that drew prey into its mouth. Its prey included other placoderms, early sharks, and large invertebrates. Its fossils are found in the Cleveland Shale Formation in Ohio, and its armoured head is well enough preserved to allow detailed biomechanical analysis. It is one of the most fearsome predators in all of Earth's history, and it predates the first dinosaur by over 200 million years. The Devonian oceans are full of sharks. Their earliest diversification happens in this period. Early ray-finned fish, the actinopterygians, ancestors of the vast majority of modern fish, are present, and a group of fish that will transform the entire future of life on land is also present: the lobe-finned fish, or sarcopterygians. Lobe-finned fish have fins supported by a bony internal skeleton. Not just a fan of rays like ray-finned fish, but a fleshy lobe with an internal structure of bones that are homologous to the bones of tetrapod limbs. The pectoral fin of a lobe-finned fish has one bone at the base, equivalent to the humerus of the upper arm. Then 2 bones, equivalent to the radius and ulna of the forearm. Then multiple smaller bones, equivalent to the wrist. Then more bones extending outward. The structural plan of the tetrapod limb is already present in modified form in the lobe-finned fish fin. Most lobe-finned fish today are represented by only 2 surviving lineages: the coelacanths, 2 species, living fossils, and the lungfish, 6 species. But in the Devonian, lobe-finned fish were diverse and abundant, and one lineage of lobe-finned fish lives in shallow, oxygen-poor waters, swamps, shallow rivers, tidal flats, where the ability to breathe air and to prop oneself up on strong lobed fins is advantageous. The transition from water to land, one of the most studied and most celebrated transitions in vertebrate evolution, happens gradually over millions of years in the late Devonian, and has been documented in remarkable detail by fossil discoveries over the past several decades. The discovery of Tiktaalik rosae in 2004, announced in 2006, represents one of the most celebrated fossil finds in recent paleontological history. Found in Devonian rocks on Ellesmere Island in Canada, Tiktaalik is dated to approximately 375 million years ago. It is, by many measures, a fish. It has scales. It has gills. It is the right shape and size for an aquatic organism. But it also has features that no ordinary fish has. Its pectoral fins are supported by a limb-like skeleton, complete with a recognizable shoulder, elbow, and wrist. Its head can move independently of its body. Fish cannot do this, because their heads are fused to their shoulder girdles, but tetrapods can. It has a neck. It has ribs strong enough to support its body weight against gravity. It was capable of a motion something like a push-up, propping its upper body up on its pectoral fins and lifting its head to look around. It could breathe air. It had both gills and lungs. Tiktaalik is a transitional form, exactly the kind of intermediate between fish and land-going tetrapods that evolutionary theory predicted. Its discovery site had been chosen specifically because it was the right age and the right depositional environment. Devonian tropical river and coastal deposits, to potentially yield exactly this kind of transitional fossil. The prediction was correct. Before Tiktaalik, slightly more fish-like. After Tiktaalik, slightly more tetrapod-like. Pandrictides and Elpistostega, slightly older and slightly more aquatic. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, slightly younger and more terrestrial, are among the earliest known tetrapods, with clear, four-limbed body plans, but still spending significant time in water. Acanthostega even has 8 digits on its front limbs, not the standard 5 that became characteristic of most tetrapod lineages. The 5-digit plan that became standard for tetrapods was not always the only option. But while the vertebrates are making this momentous transition, the land is also undergoing a dramatic transformation, and it is a transformation driven by plants. In the early Devonian, land plants are still relatively small and simple. By the Middle Devonian, vascular plants have diversified enormously. By the Late Devonian, the first genuine trees exist, woody plants with vascular tissue that can support enormous heights. And by the Late Devonian, the first genuine forests cover large areas of the land surface. Archaeopteris is one of the most significant of these early trees. It has a woody trunk, made of wood produced by secondary vascular tissue, allowing it to grow thick and tall. It reaches heights of perhaps 30 meters. It has horizontal branches with leaves. Archaeopteris forests, true forests with canopy, understory and forest floor, existed in the Late Devonian, covering areas of what is now North America and Europe and Gondwana. The first forests change everything. They pump enormous amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere. They draw down carbon dioxide. They create complex terrestrial ecosystems with soil, debris and microhabitats. They provide food in the form of leaves, wood, seeds and invertebrates for the growing community of land animals. And the dead wood, lignin-rich, indigestible, piles up. Because nothing at this point can efficiently break down lignin. The enzymes capable of digesting lignin have not yet evolved. So the wood accumulates, layer upon layer upon layer of unrotted wood. We will return to this in a later chapter, and then approximately 359 million years ago, the Devonian ends with a catastrophe. The late Devonian extinction, sometimes called the Kellwasser event, from a geological boundary in Germany, is one of the 5 largest mass extinctions in Earth's history. It is actually a series of extinction pulses spread over approximately 20 million years, with the most severe occurring at the very end of the Devonian. Approximately 75% of all species on Earth go extinct. The reef communities of the Devonian, dominated by stromatoporoids and tabulate corals, are essentially destroyed. They never fully recover. Marine invertebrate diversity is dramatically reduced, and in the ocean many lineages of placoderm fish, including Dunkleosteus, go extinct. The great armoured fish of the Devonian are gone. The causes of the late Devonian extinction are still debated. Possible contributors include global cooling related to the spread of land plants, which draw down carbon dioxide, reducing the greenhouse effect; ocean anoxia, depletion of oxygen in deep ocean waters; volcanism from the large igneous province now embedded in Siberia, and possibly asteroid impacts. Multiple factors likely work together. The first 4-limbed animals, the tetrapods, survived the extinction, but barely. Most lineages of early tetrapods disappear. A few survive into the Carboniferous, and those survivors will define the next era of life on land. The world they walk into is about to become the most oxygen-rich, the most bizarre, and the most terrifying in Earth's history. And what lives in it will make a T-Rex look manageable. Chapter 9. The Carboniferous, when insects ruled and forests covered the world 359 million years ago. The Carboniferous period begins, and it ushers in perhaps the most otherworldly version of Earth in the planet's entire history. Not more violent, not more catastrophic, but more alien, more unlike anything you have ever seen. A world that looks like Earth, but operates by different rules. Let us start with the atmosphere. The Carboniferous atmosphere is not like today's. Today's atmosphere is approximately 21% oxygen by volume. The Carboniferous atmosphere reaches oxygen levels of approximately 30 to 35%. Some estimates push it as high as 35%. This is the highest atmospheric oxygen concentration in Earth's history, at least in the 500 million years for which we have reasonable data. Where does all this oxygen come from? From the forests. The Carboniferous is the period of the great coal forests. Vast swamp forests, covering enormous areas of the tropical land masses, particularly what is now North America, Europe and parts of China, all of which were positioned near the equator at this time. The trees of these forests, giant club mosses, lycopsids, giant horsetails, calamites, tree ferns, and the first seed plants, chordata-lians, produce enormous quantities of oxygen through photosynthesis. But here is the crucial detail. These trees do not decompose when they die. When a carboniferous tree falls, it does not rot the way a tree rots today. It piles up, it buries, and over millions of years, under heat and pressure, it becomes coal. Why does it not rot? Because the organisms capable of efficiently decomposing lignin, the tough structural polymer that makes wood hard, have not yet evolved. Lignin is one of the most chemically stable organic compounds in nature. Today, certain fungi, particularly white rot fungi of the order Polyporales, produce enzymes called lignin peroxidases that can break down lignin. But the evolution of these lignin-degrading enzymes appears to have occurred primarily during or after the Carboniferous. Before these fungi existed, dead wood accumulated. It piled up. Layer upon layer upon layer of dead trees, dead club mosses, dead tree ferns, compressed and buried in the swamp sediments. This undecomposed wood is the origin of coal. The coal that powers the Industrial Revolution. The coal that generates electricity today. The coal that is driving climate change right now. It is carboniferous forest compressed into carbon. When we burn coal, we are releasing carbon dioxide that was pulled out of the atmosphere by trees that died 310 million years ago. The photosynthesis of carboniferous forests was sequestering carbon on an extraordinary scale. Trees were pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and converting it into wood. The wood was dying and accumulating rather than being decomposed. Carbon was being removed from the active cycle. More and more photosynthesis, less and less carbon dioxide, more and more oxygen. The oxygen spike of the Carboniferous is a direct consequence of the undecomposed forests. Now, what does 35% atmospheric oxygen do to life? For air-breathing animals, oxygen enters the body through the respiratory system. In insects, which breathe through a system of tubes called tracheae that carry air directly to the tissues, the efficiency of gas exchange limits body size. A larger insect needs more oxygen to reach more tissue, and the tracheal system becomes less efficient at larger sizes. It is a physical limitation, a ceiling on insect body size. But raise the oxygen concentration of the air, and that ceiling rises. With more oxygen in each breath, oxygen can diffuse further and more rapidly through the tracheal system, supporting a larger body. And in the Carboniferous, with oxygen at 30 to 35%, insects grow to sizes that are impossible today. Meganeura is a dragonfly from the Carboniferous, not a dragonfly the size of a modern dragonfly. A dragonfly with a wingspan of approximately 65 to 75 centimeters. That is nearly 30 inches, roughly the wingspan of a modern hawk. It is a flying predatory insect the size of a bird, hunting other insects and possibly small amphibians. It is real. It is a real animal that lived on this planet. 310 million years ago, you could have looked up and seen something the size of a hawk that was unmistakably a dragonfly. Arthropleura is a millipede from the Carboniferous. Fossil trackways and body fragments indicate it reached lengths of approximately 2 to 2.5 meters and widths of around 50 centimeters. It is the largest known land invertebrate in Earth's history. A millipede 2.5 meters long. It fed primarily on plant material, decaying leaves and wood, the abundant litter of the coal forests. It is known from trackways preserved in ancient sediment, long parallel groove tracks that tell you exactly how wide and how heavy this creature was. Giant scorpions, some reaching 70 centimeters or more, giant centipedes, giant cockroaches. The Carboniferous is when cockroaches first diversify, and early Carboniferous cockroach diversity is extraordinary. Giant spiders. The invertebrate world of the Carboniferous operates on a scale that has no parallel in any world you have ever seen. Among vertebrates, the Carboniferous is dominated by amphibians. The descendants of the Devonian tetrapods have diversified dramatically. Some are small, lizard-sized, others are large. Eriops, known from the early Permian but with earlier Carboniferous relatives, was approximately 1.5 to 2 meters long, a robust, heavily built, semi-aquatic predator. Temnospondyli, a diverse group of large amphibian-grade tetrapods, fill many of the roles that crocodilians would later occupy. Large, predatory, semi-aquatic, with strong jaws and conical teeth. But the Carboniferous also sees the evolution of the most important innovation in the history of land vertebrates: the amniotic egg. All animals descended from the Devonian tetrapods initially reproduce like amphibians do today. They lay eggs that must be kept moist, usually in water, because the embryo inside has no specialized water retention. An amphibian egg dries out if exposed to air. This means amphibians must return to water to breed. They are tethered to water. They cannot colonize truly dry inland environments. Approximately 312 million years ago, give or take, a lineage of small tetrapods evolves a revolutionary reproductive structure: the amniotic egg, an egg surrounded by multiple membranes, the amnion, the chorion, and the allantois, that together create a self-contained aquatic environment inside a protective shell. The embryo inside develops in its own private pond. It does not need to be in water. It does not dry out. It can be laid on dry land. The egg is portable. The egg is independent. This is the origin of the amniotes, the group that includes all reptiles, all birds, and all mammals. Every egg-laying reptile, every bird, every mammal alive today descended from those first amniotes that evolved the amniotic egg in the Carboniferous. The amniotic egg set those animals free from water, and once free, they spread across every terrestrial environment on Earth. The first amniotes are small, lizard-like creatures, perhaps 20 to 30 centimeters long. They are not yet the dominant animals, but they have the key technology. And in the Permian period that follows, they will use it to take over the world. The Carboniferous does not end gently. The oxygen levels decline as the fungi capable of decomposing lignin slowly evolve. The coal forests begin to fragment. The climate becomes drier and more variable. The great equatorial swamp forests retreat. The giant insects shrink, not in evolutionary terms, but in the sense that the populations of giant species decline as the oxygen level drops and their physiological advantage disappears. By the end of the Carboniferous, we are in a world closer to the one we know, but still utterly different. The oxygen drops, the forests die, the giant insects shrink, and out of this dying world, one group of animals emerges with the amniotic egg, the reptiles, that will take over the planet. But before the reptiles can rise fully, Earth has one more catastrophe to deliver, the largest mass extinction in its history. Chapter 10. The Permian, the world before the dinosaurs. 299 million years ago. The Permian period begins, and it is, in many ways, the most important period for understanding what Earth looked like just before dinosaurs. Because the Permian produces a world full of extraordinary creatures that, for most of its history, thriving on every continent, creatures that are so strange, so unlike anything alive today, that they deserve their own place in any conversation about the monsters that preceded the dinosaurs. But first, the world itself. The geography of the Permian is unlike anything that exists today. The continents have been assembling for tens of millions of years, driven by plate tectonics, the slow movement of the lithospheric plates that make up Earth's surface. And by the middle of the Permian, they are essentially complete. All of the world's land masses have merged into one supercontinent, Pangaea, from the Greek for all land. Pangaea stretches from pole to pole, from the South Pole to the North Pole, unbroken, one enormous landmass. Around it is one enormous ocean, Panthalassa, the All-Sea. And between the eastern indent of Pangaea, where Europe and Asia meet Africa, is the Tethys Sea, a tropical oceanic embayment that provides some moderating influence on the interior climate. The geography of Pangaea has profound climatic consequences. On a fragmented planet with multiple continents and multiple oceans, ocean currents moderate climate. Warm tropical waters are carried toward the poles. Cool polar waters are carried toward the tropics. With one ocean surrounding one continent, this moderating effect is reduced. The interior of Pangaea, far from any ocean, experiences extreme continental climate. Hot in summer, cold in winter, very dry. Deserts spread across much of the interior. The Permian has polar ice caps at the beginning, continuing from the glaciation that ended the Carboniferous. But over the course of the Permian, the planet warms. The ice caps melt. By the late Permian, Earth is significantly warmer than today. A greenhouse world with high carbon dioxide levels and no permanent polar ice. But the interior of Pangaea is still hot and dry. Enormous deserts, seasonal extremes, a climate that demands tough adaptations from any land organism. And the land organisms of the Permian are, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. The dominant land animals of the Permian are not reptiles in the modern sense. They are synapsids, a group that diverged from the ancestral amniote lineage very early, approximately 300 to 310 million years ago. Synapsids are distinguished by a single temporal opening in the skull, a hole behind the eye socket through which the jaw muscles pass. This opening allows for larger, more powerful jaw muscles than the ancestral closed skull design. And over time, synapsid jaw musculature becomes increasingly elaborate and complex, for a very important reason that we will return to. The early Permian synapsids, the pelycosaurs, are large, reptile-like animals with sprawling limb posture, limbs extending out to the sides like modern lizards, and relatively primitive metabolisms. And the most famous of them is one of the most commonly misidentified prehistoric animals in popular culture: Dimetrodon. People think Dimetrodon is a dinosaur. Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur. It is not even close to a dinosaur. In evolutionary terms, Dimetrodon is more closely related to every mammal, than it is to any dinosaur. It is a synapsid, a pelycosaur, belonging to the lineage that leads to mammals, while dinosaurs belong to an entirely different lineage, the archosaurs, that diverges later. Dimetrodon is notable for the enormous sail on its back, a structure made of elongated neural spines that may have supported a skin membrane. Hypotheses about the function of this sail have included thermoregulation, heating and cooling the animal by orienting the sail toward or away from sunlight, species recognition, and sexual display. It lived from approximately 295 to 272 million years ago, 20 million years before the first dinosaurs, and it was already extinct before the first dinosaurs evolved. But Dimetrodon, for all its fame, is not the most impressive synapsid of the Permian. The late Permian sees the rise of a group called the therapsids, the more derived synapsids, more mammal-like in many ways, that replaced the pelycosaurs as the dominant land animals. And, among the therapsids, the predators that dominate the late Permian are the gorgonopsids. Gorgonopsids are the apex predators of the late Permian. They have large elongated skulls with massive canine teeth, fangs projecting downward from the upper jaw and upward from the lower jaw. The word saber-toothed is appropriate. Some gorgonopsid canines are significantly longer than those of any saber-toothed cat. The largest gorgonopsids, Inostransvir from Russia, reach approximately 3 to 3.5 meters in length and carry canine teeth up to 15 centimeters long. Gorgonopsids are believed to have had a more upright posture than earlier pelycosaurs, limbs somewhat beneath the body rather than fully sprawling to the sides. This allows faster, more sustained locomotion. They are active predators in the full sense. They hunt, they pursue, they kill with their enormous canines, and then use their complex differentiated teeth, incisors, canines, and postcanines to process prey. No modern reptile has differentiated teeth like this. Mammals do. Gorgonopsids are beginning to show the features that will become characteristic of mammals. Among their prey are animals like moschops, a large plant-eating therapsid from South Africa, reaching perhaps 5 meters in length and 2 tons in weight, with a massively thickened skull that may have been used in headbutting contests. Or the dicynodonts, peculiar herbivorous therapsids with a beak and usually just 2 large tusk-like canine teeth, ranging from rabbit-sized to hippopotamus-sized, and representing some of the most successful herbivores in Permian ecosystems. There are also the dinocephalians, large, heavily built synapsids, some of which were herbivores and some predators, all characterized by thick, reinforced skulls. And the cynodonts, a group of therapsids that are the most mammal-like of all and which will survive the end of the Permian to give rise to the mammals themselves. Cynodonts, particularly the later, more derived forms, show a suite of features that are quintessentially mammalian. Their teeth are not just differentiated. They show the beginnings of occlusion, meaning the upper and lower teeth fit together precisely, allowing efficient processing of food. Their secondary palate, a shelf of bone separating the mouth from the nasal passage, allows them to breathe while eating. No reptile has this feature. All mammals do. The secondary palate is a mammalian characteristic, and cynodonts are evolving it in the Permian. Their jaw shows the beginning of a remarkable transformation that will continue into the Triassic, the gradual reduction of the posterior jaw bones and their progressive incorporation into the middle ear. In primitive amniotes and modern reptiles, the lower jaw is made up of multiple bones. In mammals, the lower jaw is made of a single bone, the dentary. The other jaw bones of the primitive lower jaw have, in mammal evolution, migrated into the middle ear to become the malleus and incus, two of the three tiny bones of the mammalian middle ear that transmit sound vibrations from the eardrum to the inner ear. You hear with bones that were once part of the jaw of something like a cynodont. The Permian world is rich, diverse and dominated by creatures that are not dinosaurs and not mammals, but something in between. Moving on die, tukan, toward or moving toward mammalhood, carrying the innovations that will eventually produce every mammal alive today. The Permian fauna are, by any standard, a success. Synapsids rule every continent, life is thriving at every level. And then, in geological terms, in the blink of an eye, almost all of it dies. What kills the Permian is so massive, so catastrophic, that scientists call it simply the Great Dying. Chapter 11. The Great Dying, the End Permian Mass Extinction, 252 million years ago. The worst moment in the history of life on Earth. Not a bad moment, not a difficult moment. The worst moment, by a significant margin. Let us establish the scale immediately, so there is no ambiguity about what we are discussing. The End Permian mass extinction kills approximately 96% of all marine species. 96%. In the modern ocean, this would be equivalent to every fish, every coral, every mollusk, every echinoderm, every crustacean, every marine mammal, and every whale, all of them gone. A 4% survival rate in the ocean. On land, approximately 70% of all vertebrate species go extinct. Most of the lush Permian diversity, the gorgonopsids, the large dinocephalians, most lineages of dicynodonts, most of the diverse tetrapod fauna, disappears. The extinction is so severe that recovery takes between 5 and 10 million years, an extraordinarily long time for life to bounce back. For comparison, after the End Cretaceous extinction that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, diversity was largely restored within a few million years. The Permian extinction was so much worse that recovery took twice as long. What causes this? The answer is volcanic eruptions. But not just any volcanic eruptions on a scale that has happened only a handful of times in Earth's history. In what is now Siberia, northern Russia, a series of volcanic eruptions begins approximately 252 million years ago. These eruptions do not come from a single volcano. They come from fissures, cracks in the crust, spread across an area of roughly 2 million square kilometers. The entire region is erupting simultaneously or in rapid succession. Over a period of perhaps 1 to 2 million years, these eruptions produce an estimated 1 million to 4 million cubic kilometers of lava. This is a geologic structure called a large igneous province, and this one is called the Siberian Traps. Traps being derived from the Swedish word for staircase, referring to the step-like terrain formed by successive lava flows. 1 million cubic kilometers of lava. Put this in perspective. The largest eruption in recorded human history, the eruption of Attenborough in 1815, produced approximately 160 cubic kilometers of magma. The Siberian Traps eruptions produced roughly 10,000 times as much. Not one Attenborough, 10,000 Attenboroughs, happening continuously for hundreds of thousands to millions of years. The volcanic activity itself, the lava floods covering enormous areas, is destructive. But the lava is not what kills the world. The gases are. Volcanic eruptions release enormous quantities of gases: sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, water vapor, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen fluoride, and others. The Siberian Traps eruptions discharge estimated volumes of carbon dioxide measured in the tens of thousands of gigatons. Some analyses suggest between 10,000 and 48,000 gigatons of carbon released. For comparison, all human industrial activity from the Industrial Revolution to today has released approximately 600 gigatons of carbon. The Siberian Traps release dozens of times more carbon than all of human industry, and released it in geological bursts of centuries to millennia rather than over hundreds of years. The carbon dioxide spike drives rapid global warming. Ocean temperatures may have increased by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above pre-extinction levels in the tropics. In the polar regions, the warming may have been even more extreme. This warming drives ocean anoxia, the depletion of dissolved oxygen from ocean waters. Warm water holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water. As the ocean warms, oxygen levels drop. Deep ocean waters become anoxic, dead zones where nothing can breathe. These dead zones expand toward the surface. Marine organisms that need oxygen, which is most of them, have nowhere to go. But the carbon dioxide is not the only deadly gas. The Siberian Traps eruptions also release enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide reacts with water vapor in the atmosphere to form sulfuric acid aerosols. Tiny droplets of sulfuric acid suspended in the stratosphere. These aerosols reflect sunlight, causing rapid short-term cooling, potentially interrupting warming with brief cold snaps. But more importantly, sulfur dioxide and its atmospheric products contribute to acid rain. Rain acidified enough to dissolve rock, kill plants, and acidify soils and waterways. The eruptions also interact with the surrounding rock. The Siberian Traps lavas are emplaced partly through coal-bearing sedimentary rocks, Permian coal deposits. The heat of the lavas volatilizes this coal, releasing additional carbon dioxide and methane. But the interaction with rock also releases halogen gases, chlorine and bromine compounds. These halogens reach the stratosphere and destroy ozone. The ozone layer, Earth's shield against ultraviolet radiation, is depleted. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun reaches the surface at elevated intensities, damaging DNA in cells exposed to sunlight. This affects plants, phytoplankton, and any surface-dwelling organism. Evidence for UV damage at the Permian-Triassic boundary comes from the fossil pollen record. Pollen grains from plants at the boundary show malformations, abnormal shapes and structures, consistent with UV-induced DNA damage. Mutant pollen produced by plants struggling under intense ultraviolet bombardment. And then there is the methane. The warming from carbon dioxide causes the permafrost in Permian polar regions to thaw, releasing stored methane, a greenhouse gas many times more potent than carbon dioxide. Additionally, warming oceans destabilize methane hydrates, ice-like structures on the seafloor that trap enormous quantities of methane. When the water warms enough, these hydrates decompose, releasing their methane. This additional methane amplifies the warming, which releases more methane, which amplifies the warming further. A feedback loop, a runaway greenhouse effect. The combined effect of all of these processes, warming, ocean anoxia, acid rain, ozone depletion, and feedback-amplified greenhouse warming, is a global environment so hostile to life that 96% of marine species cannot survive it. The recovery from the end Permian extinction is slow and painful. The early Triassic, immediately after the extinction, is sometimes called the dead interval. Fossil diversity is extraordinarily low. The ecosystems that do exist are impoverished, dominated by a small number of highly opportunistic species, what scientists call disaster species, that can survive in disturbed, low-diversity environments. Lystrosaurus, a dicynodont therapsid, one of the few large land vertebrates to survive the extinction, dominates the early Triassic terrestrial fauna. In some early Triassic fossil beds, Lystrosaurus makes up over 90% of all vertebrate fossils. One species, 90% of all vertebrate life. This is not a thriving world. This is a world clinging to existence. The oceans are full of microbial mats. The world has, in a sense, reverted to something approaching its ancient Proterozoic state. Simple, low-diversity microbial communities dominating an ocean stripped of its complex fauna. For millions of years after the extinction, ecosystems struggle to rebuild. Slowly, over 5 to 10 million years, diversity increases. New lineages diversify from the survivors. Ecosystems rebuild from scratch, with new players filling the roles vacated by the extinct species. And among the recovering lineages, one group is quietly, steadily gaining ground. The archosaurs. The Permian is over. The great dying has nearly sterilized the planet. But a few survivors cling to life in a devastated world. And from those survivors, over the next 50 million years, one group will slowly, quietly rise, not yet dominant, not yet the rulers, but on their way. The age of dinosaurs is coming, but it is not here yet. Chapter 12, The Triassic Dawn. Life rebuilds 252 million years ago. The world is wrecked. The forests are gone. The Permian fauna, the gorgonopsids, the large dicynodonts, the dinocephalians, almost entirely gone. The ocean is barely alive. The land is a patchwork of surviving organisms in an environment still recovering from the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history. But life is resilient. Stubbornly, methodically, it rebuilds. The earliest Triassic, the Indian stage, from 252 to 251.9 million years ago, is the most depauperate interval in the entire post-Cambrian fossil record. Fewer species, less diversity, simpler ecosystems. Lystrosaurus walks in vast numbers across a nearly empty landscape. Early archosaur lineage reptiles begin to appear. Small cynodonts, the survivors who will give rise to mammals, persist quietly. The Triassic period spans from 252 to 201 million years ago. 51 million years. And during this time, three major groups compete to fill the ecological vacuum left by the Permian extinction. First, the synapsids, specifically the cynodonts, the survivors of the Permian, already on the mammalian line. Second, a new group of archosaurs, the dominant vertebrates of the mid to late Triassic, including the lineage that gives rise to crocodilians and the lineage that gives rise to dinosaurs and birds. And third, from within the archosaurs, one group emerges that will eventually become the most famous animals in Earth's history: the dinosaurs. The archosaurs, ruling reptiles, are a group of diapsid reptiles, reptiles with two temporal openings in the skull, characterized by a suite of features including ankle anatomy and various skull features. They split early in the Triassic into two major lineages: the Pseudosuchians, the archosaur lineage that gives rise to modern crocodilians, and the Avermetaetarsalians, the archosaur lineage that gives rise to pterosaurs, dinosaurs, and birds. The Pseudosuchians initially are the more successful group. In the mid-Triassic, they are diverse, abundant, and filling many ecological roles on land. The Aetosaurs, armoured pig-like Pseudosuchians that are herbivores. The Phytosaurs, long-snouted, crocodile-like Pseudosuchians that are the apex semi-aquatic predators of many Triassic ecosystems. The Rauisuchians, large, fully terrestrial predatory Pseudosuchians, some with upright limb posture. The Pseudosuchians are, in the mid-Triassic, the dominant large land animals. And then there are the dinosaurs. But not as you imagine them. The first true dinosaurs appear in the fossil record approximately 230 to 235 million years ago, in the Carnian stage of the Triassic. The oldest definitive dinosaur fossils come from the Ischigualasto Formation in Argentina, one of the most productive Triassic fossil sites on Earth. And the earliest dinosaurs are not large. They are not dominant. They are not the rulers of their world. Eoraptor lunensis, dawn thief from the Moon Valley, is one of the earliest known dinosaurs. It is approximately 1 meter long, perhaps 5 to 10 kilograms in weight. It walks bipedally on 2 legs, which is characteristic of the earliest dinosaurs. It has small, leaf-shaped teeth, suggesting it may have been omnivorous. It shares its world with far larger, far more dominant animals, pseudosuchian archosaurs, that dwarf it. Herrerasaurus ischigualastensis, also from the Ischigualasta formation, is larger, at perhaps 3 to 4 meters in length, and is clearly a predator. But even Herrerasaurus is not the dominant predator of its time and place. Larger Rauisuchian pseudosuchians shared the same environment. Why are the early dinosaurs not dominant? Because they are new arrivals in a world already organized. The ecological roles are filled. The large predator niche is occupied by pseudosuchians. The large herbivore niche is occupied by etosaurs and rhynchosaurs and large dicynodonts that have recovered from the Permian extinction. The earliest dinosaurs are small, niche players in an ecosystem that does not yet belong to them. This is one of the most important and frequently misunderstood facts about early dinosaur evolution. Dinosaurs do not immediately take over after the Permian extinction. They appear approximately 15 to 20 million years after the end of the Permian, and for the first 20 million years or so of their existence, they are a minor component of most terrestrial ecosystems. The world does not immediately become the age of dinosaurs. It takes a second extinction event to clear the field. At approximately 201 million years ago, at the end of the Triassic period, another mass extinction occurs. The end Triassic extinction. It kills approximately 70 to 80% of all species on Earth. The cause is again a large igneous province, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, which erupted as Pangaea began to break apart. Massive volcanic activity, carbon dioxide release, warming, ocean acidification. A similar mechanism to the Permian extinction, though not quite as severe. The end Triassic extinction eliminates most of the non-dinosaurian archosaurs that had been competing with the dinosaurs, the phytosaurs, the etosaurs, the Rauisuchians. The large non-dinosaurian archosaurs are largely gone, and the dicynodonts, the last large mammal-like reptile herbivores, disappear as well. The world is open, the competitors have been removed, and the dinosaurs, already present, already established on every continent, already diversifying, step into the vacuum. At the very end of the Triassic and the beginning of the Jurassic, dinosaur diversity explodes. Not because they evolved some revolutionary new feature at this moment, but because the competition was eliminated. The ecological space was cleared, and dinosaurs were perfectly positioned to fill it. The dinosaurs are here, small, marginal, not yet rulers, but their competitors have just been wiped out. The stage is clear, and in the Jurassic they will explode across the planet. But that is another story. Conclusion. What this all means: 4.5 billion years. That is what we have covered today. 4.5 billion years of a planet building itself, destroying itself, rebuilding and building again. 4.5 billion years of life. For most of that time, invisible, microscopic, living at the chemical margin of what is possible, and then gradually increasingly complex. Until 230 million years ago, when the first small bipedal archosaurs, the first dinosaurs, appear in a landscape that is already ancient beyond comprehension. But let us be very specific about what this history means, because it is not a story of progress. It is not a story of life working toward a goal. It is not a story with a predetermined ending. It is a story of accident, of contingency, of near-total failure, and of survival against extraordinary odds. The Hadean could have prevented life from ever forming. The bombardment was severe enough to sterilize the planet repeatedly, and yet life formed anyway, possibly as early as 4.1 billion years ago. In the brief intervals between catastrophic impacts, chemistry proceeded. RNA assembled. Membranes formed. Metabolism began. The great oxidation event killed most of the life that existed at the time, an extinction larger and more total than any that followed. And yet the survivors, the aerobic bacteria, the cyanobacteria, and the handful of adaptable anaerobes, went on to produce every complex organism that has ever lived. The great poisoning was, from the survivor's perspective, the greatest gift in the history of life. Snowball Earth buried the planet in ice for tens of millions of years. Life clung to existence in the dark, in the cold, under the ice, near volcanic heat. Not thriving, barely alive. And then the ice melted, and the survivors poured into a warm, nutrient-rich world and produced the Ediacaran fauna, and shortly after, the Cambrian explosion. The near extinction produced the most dramatic diversification in the history of animal life. The Great Dying, the end Permian extinction, killed 96% of all marine species and 70% of land vertebrates. It came within a catastrophic margin of sterilizing the planet entirely. The world was, for several million years after, barely alive. And yet the survivors, Lystrosaurus and the cynodonts on land, a handful of fish and marine invertebrates in the ocean, rebuilt. And the rebuilding produced the Triassic, which produced the dinosaurs, which eventually produced the birds. Every mass extinction in this story is followed by diversification. Every catastrophe that kills most of what exists creates the space, the empty ecological niches, that allows the survivors to diversify into forms that would never have been possible if the extinction had not cleared the way. The extinction of the Permian made room for the archosaurs. The extinction of the Triassic made room for the dinosaurs. The extinction of the Cretaceous made room for the mammals, including our primate ancestors, including us. But here is the thing to understand about all of this. None of it was inevitable. At every step, life could have failed. If the Siberian traps had been even more voluminous, if even fewer species had survived the end Permian extinction, recovery might never have happened. If the impact that ended the Cretaceous had missed or had been smaller, mammals might never have diversified. Primates might never have evolved, and there would be no one to write or read this script. The entire 4.5 billion year history of Earth is a series of near misses. near sterilizations, near total failures, each survived by a small margin, often by a small number of species in a small number of refugia. And from each survival, life rebuilt differently in new directions, producing new organisms and new ecosystems that no one could have predicted from the state of affairs before the catastrophe. Now, consider what this means for the atoms in your body. Every atom of carbon in your DNA, the carbon that makes up the molecular letters of your genetic code, was at some point either in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or dissolved in the ancient ocean, or locked in the body of some Precambrian microbe, or in a Permian synapsid, or in a Cretaceous mammal. The carbon in you has been part of life, and part of rock, and part of air, and part of ocean, cycling through the planet's chemistry for billions of years. The oxygen you breathe right now, the oxygen your mitochondria are using this second to power your cells, was produced by cyanobacteria, by organisms alive today that are the direct descendants of the organisms that first invented oxygenic photosynthesis approximately 3 billion years ago. Every breath you take is made possible by a lineage of bacteria that has been doing what it does since before the first eukaryotic cell existed. The mitochondria in your cells, the organelles generating the ATP that powers every thought you think and every movement you make, are the direct descendants of bacteria that were engulfed by another cell approximately 2 billion years ago. You are, in a very real sense, a community of organisms that merged at different points in deep time and have been working together ever since. The jaw that allows you to eat, the bones of your lower jaw, are homologous to bones that, in Permian synapsids like Thrinaxodon, were part of the jaw. And two of those bones, the malleus and incus in your middle ear, have migrated from the jaw into the ear over the course of mammalian evolution. You hear with your ancestors' jaw. The world before the dinosaurs is not ancient history in the sense of being irrelevant. It is the foundation of everything that exists today. Every feature of every organism alive on Earth right now, every molecular machine in every cell, every body plan, every metabolic pathway, every ecological relationship has roots that extend back through the Triassic, through the Permian, through the Carboniferous, through the Devonian, through the Cambrian, through the Ediacaran, through the Proterozoic, through the Archean, all the way back to the first self-replicating molecules in the ancient ocean of the Hadean Earth. 95% of Earth's history preceded the dinosaurs, and in that 95%, life invented everything. The cell, the nucleus, the mitochondrion, sexual reproduction, multicellularity, the eye, the jaw, the limb, the lung, the amniotic egg, the tooth, the bone, the brain. By the time the first dinosaur takes its first step, all of the fundamental innovations have already been made. Every tool in the evolutionary toolkit has already been invented. The dinosaurs, impressive as they are just one more chapter in a story that was already 4 billion years old. We talk about the age of dinosaurs as though it were the central chapter of Earth's story. It is not. It is one of the later chapters, and the chapters before it, the Hadean, the Archean, the Proterozoic, the Paleozoic, are longer, stranger, and in many ways more important than anything that happens after. This planet has been building toward complexity for 4.5 billion years. It has nearly failed a dozen times. Life has nearly been extinguished over and over again, and every time it was not, it came back. Different, stranger, more complex, more resilient. You are sitting here, or walking, or driving, or lying in bed, listening to this. And you exist because of an unbroken chain of survivors that extends 4 billion years into the past. Every single one of your ancestors, from the first RNA molecule to your parents, survived long enough to reproduce. Every single one, without exception. Across every mass extinction, every glaciation, every asteroid impact, every catastrophic volcanic eruption, every ozone collapse, every ocean anoxia event, your lineage survived. That is not nothing. That is not a small thing. That is perhaps the most extraordinary fact in the history of this planet. Before the dinosaurs, there was a world. Several worlds, in fact. A molten world, a frozen world, a world of poisonous atmosphere, a world of giant insects, a world of saber-toothed monsters that were not dinosaurs and not mammals, but something in between. Worlds upon worlds stacked on top of each other, separated by catastrophes, rebuilt from scratch again and again. And we came from all of it, every atom of it, every catastrophe, every near extinction, every impossible recovery. That is the history of Earth before the dinosaurs. That is what was here. That is what we are made of.